Africa economist at HSBC. He says South Africa's energy crisis is a significant concern and one that will overshadow the oil inflationary relief windfall. David joins us now in studio for some incitement or enlightenment on this. David, good to have you as always.
Thanks.
You believe that this Eskom crisis is a largely significant one, so much so that you've even revised our growth figures downwards.
Yes, we've HSBC have taken our growth figures down from 2% for 2015 down to 1.6%, and for 2016 we now see the economy growing at 1.9% instead of 2.2%. And as you point out, we think that some of the optimism that we may have started the year with oil prices falling significantly, with headline inflation coming down, with the boost that gives to real incomes, we think that's going to be overshadowed by the power crisis, by the fact that it's going to crimp on investment decisions, on confidence, on export performance.
But tell us about that, because some people might say that the relief that we found in the oil price has slashed costs by almost 50% following the drop that we've seen. Surely that relief will filter through?
Well, firstly, there's a little bit of a difference between what we've seen in the fall in the crude oil price and what we've seen in the local fuel price because of other administered prices within the fuel price. So we've seen a 50% fall in the rand price of crude oil, but fuel prices are down maybe 30% over the last 6 months. It should provide a significant boost. We have increased our forecast for consumer spending. We do accept that this is going to be a strengthener of consumer spending, of government spending as well in real terms if you think about their nominal expenditure targets. However, we still see that there are several headwinds to the consumer. We don't think employment levels are going to rise particularly fast this year. We see that consumer credit remains very, very weak. And also in this world of load shedding, that surely impinges on consumer confidence and some consumer behaviour beyond that.
It's funny, we heard what Justin just said a moment ago about South Africa dipping its toes into the realm of alternative energy sources. So despite the efforts that might be made by private companies like Emira, will this completely offset whatever gains that we could potentially see with regard to growth?
Our view is certainly that we're in a very difficult situation. The communication we're seeing from Eskom is suggesting that we're in this difficult situation of load shedding certainly for the next 3 months. The probabilities are very, very high, probably for the next 6 months, and that the energy shortage or the fragility of energy supply remains certainly in place for the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. We are, in many respects, quite an energy-intensive economy. Mining and manufacturing are 20% of GDP, but they're 30% of investment. And energy-intensive exports are 70% of total exports. And these are producers that are going to be hit by this energy crisis. So we do think that that's going to weigh particularly on the outlook for investment, for exports. One other thing that should be noted is that in a capacity-constrained economy like South Africa, yes, we may well see faster domestic demand, faster consumer spending, but a lot of that may well have to come through from higher imports, and that's going to be negative for GDP.
David, what about agriculture? It was listed in the State of the Nation address just last night as one of the pointers to help curb and stimulate growth in South Africa together with Operation Phakisa. Will these not also assist us in reaching our growth targets?
The performance of the agriculture sector in 2014 was spectacular. It's been one of the highlights really in a year where the economy kind of limped through, affected by strikes in mining and manufacturing. And it certainly will have a part to play, but in reality agriculture is still a very, very small sector of this economy. You're talking about 2 to 3% of total GDP. So even very strong growth rates aren't going to have a massive impact on headline GDP for the whole economy.
What does this mean for the MPC then? How do they stimulate growth in such an environment?
Again, I mean, the governor of the central bank faces a very challenging period. We think growth is going to slow. The SARB thinks growth is going to remain pretty weak. They have a forecast for 2.2%. Inflation's come down. Some people are suggesting that in this environment they can cut rates. They can stimulate growth through doing so. Our view, and I think also the view of the SARB outlined in the January MPC meeting, was that it's structural issues that are constraining growth in the South African economy. Cutting monetary policy rates is going to do very little. We certainly think that in an energy-constrained economy, the ceiling for growth is very low and very hard. And so there's very little that monetary policy can do. We think they're going to keep rates on hold through the course of this year, but that there are risks. If the US Fed decides to tighten, if the data in the US remains very strong, they may well be forced to.
Tough times ahead, but let's try to find some light at the end of the tunnel. When you speak to some of your colleagues and counterparts from a global perspective, the outsiders looking in, what are they saying about South Africa? What are their key concerns?
So there are concerns around growth, there are concerns around the big twin deficits, but one of the things that I think is very important and very critical is that there's certainly a belief in the strength of institutions in the economy, the strength of the Reserve Bank, the strength of the Treasury, good governance taking place in terms of kind of macro policy and macro stability. Compare that to other economies in this time zone, places like Russia or Turkey. These are economies that are suffering and struggling much more. We're expecting deep contractions in Russia. In Turkey, you're seeing rates being cut, possibly inappropriately so. And South Africa actually looks relatively good in that environment. So while from an insular perspective things are very challenging, there's probably a fragile equilibrium right now whereby South Africa could actually benefit from capital inflows into the country.
Exactly. David, thank you so much for your insights today. Hopefully we will find some optimism in time to come. Always a pleasure having you with us. That was David Faulkner, South Africa economist at HSBC.